The morning sun poured through the cracks of a wounded Pearl Harbor, painting the twisted metal in golden ash. Lieutenant Commander Joseph Rockefeller leaned over his desk, surrounded by mountains of coded messages that whispered of war. The air smelled of coffee gone cold and cigarette smoke that clung to everything like worry. He hadn't seen his family in weeks. His uniform was a mess, his eyes bloodshot, but his mind was alive, too alive. Something was coming. He could feel it like static before a storm. The enemy's transmissions pulsed through Station Hypo like a heartbeat. Faster, louder, relentless. Outside, the Pacific Fleet lay crippled for battleships buried beneath the harbor's oily surface. Yet in that underground office, hope was quietly reborn. Rockefeller knew what the Japanese didn't. America was not defeated. It was only waking up, learning, adapting, sharpening its claws for the counterstrike to come. Outside the basement walls of the 14th Naval District, the tropical wind carried the faint scent of salt and rust, reminders of a fleet still bleeding. Pearl Harbor, once the pride of the Pacific, was now a cemetery of steel. Rockefeller's fingers traced lines of code like a gambler reading fate. His team worked in silence, broken only by the clatter of IBM tabulators and the soft hum of fluorescent lights. The words on the decrypted pages made little sense alone, but together they whispered something ominous. Operation MI. AF. The same shadow kept returning in the messages, a ghost that refused to name itself. "Sir, another intercept," a young cryptanalyst said, placing a new sheet on Rockefeller's desk. His voice trembled from exhaustion, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights. "They're requesting additional supplies for Operation MI." Rockefeller froze. The code fragments, the strange frequency spikes, the logistics chatter, it all fit. The enemy was planning something vast, maybe the largest operation since Pearl Harbor. But where would they strike? And when? He looked at the intercepted characters again, his tired eyes narrowing. AF. A single mystery, but one that could change the course of the war. Admiral Chester Nimitz stood at the window of his headquarters, watching salvage crews labor over the skeletal remains of the USS Arizona. The air outside was heavy with oil and silence. Inside, his mind was already at war. Behind him, Commander Edwin Layton cleared his throat. "Sir, Rockefeller's team believes they've found a pattern. Something major is being planned for early June. They think it could be the enemy's largest move yet." Nimitz turned slowly, his ice blue eyes sharp with quiet authority. "How certain are they?" he asked. "Rockefeller's staking his career on it," Layton said without hesitation. "He believes the target lies somewhere in the Central Pacific." The admiral nodded once. He didn't doubt his intelligence men, not anymore. While others dismissed cryptanalysis as theory, Nimitz had learned that in this new kind of war, information was firepower. He turned back to the window. Beyond the horizon, Japan's empire was stretching too far, too fast. And every empire that overreaches eventually breaks. The basement of Station Hypo buzzed with quiet desperation. The smell of stale coffee mixed with the heat from clattering machines. Paper spilled across desks like snowdrifts. Every page a fragment of a puzzle no one else could see. Then, one afternoon, Lieutenant Commander Wesley Wright broke the silence. "Sir, the Japanese are referencing water desalination equipment for AF," he said, disbelief in his voice. "Why would they need that for a major naval base?" Rockefeller's eyes widened. Water, fresh water, meant an isolated location, somewhere small but strategically vital. His mind raced. Then it hit him like lightning. Midway, the tiny atoll guarding the approaches to Hawaii. "Give me Layton," Rockefeller ordered. "Tell him we'll prove it." They would send a fake message, a plain-language radio report claiming Midway's water plant was broken. If Japan's coded traffic mentioned it, AF was confirmed. Hours later, the trap was set. Days later, the proof arrived. The Japanese were complaining about Midway's water shortage. Rockefeller exhaled, finally smiling through the exhaustion. "We've got them," he whispered. "We know where they're going." Far across the Pacific, the U.S. carriers prepared for a battle they weren't yet sure they could win. On the USS Enterprise, Admiral William Bull, Halsey lay confined in sick bay, his skin raw from illness, his spirit burning with frustration. His second, Admiral Raymond Spruance, stood by his bed, calm, analytical, the opposite of Halsey in every way. "Ray," Halsey rasped, his voice thin, "I'm giving you command. Take my boys and hit them hard. They trust you, so do I." Spruance nodded. He'd never led a carrier fleet in combat before. But he understood something deeper. Wars weren't won by impulse. They were won by discipline and clarity. Meanwhile, on Midway itself, Marine Colonel Harold Shannon surveyed his airfield, rows of patched-up aircraft gleaming in the sun. Many were obsolete Brewster Buffaloes, already proven helpless against Japan's Zero fighters. "Are we really supposed to stop the Imperial Navy with these?" asked Major Lofton Henderson, his voice half laugh, half resignation. "We'll stop them or die trying," Shannon said. His eyes never left the sky. Every minute they could hold out would buy the Navy time, and maybe, just maybe, change history. At Pearl Harbor, the once silent docks came alive like a waking giant. Sparks flew from welding torches, steel plates clanged, and men worked until their hands bled. The USS Yorktown, still scarred from the Battle of the Coral Sea, lay wounded at the pier, but Nimitz had given the impossible order. "You have 3 days," he said flatly. "I want that ship ready to fight. 3 days to do 3 months of work." 1,400 men answered the challenge, working without sleep. The sound of hammering became the rhythm of defiance. Every rivet, every weld was an act of vengeance for Pearl Harbor. By May 30th, the Yorktown was patched, repainted, and, though limping, ready for war. The crew knew she wasn't perfect, but she was alive. Across the base, pilots ran last-minute drills. Mechanics rechecked bombs, torpedoes, and fuel lines. In the ready rooms, maps were unfolded, and commanders whispered strategies. The trap was set. The bait was Midway. In the early hours of May 28th, Task Force 16, Enterprise and Hornet under Admiral Spruance, slipped out of Pearl Harbor under the cover of darkness. 2 days later, the Yorktown followed, her patched hull gleaming faintly under the moonlight. 3 carriers, against 4 of Japan's finest, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. It didn't matter. The Americans had something Japan no longer did: surprise. Aboard the Enterprise, Commander Wade McCluskey briefed his pilots, his voice calm but urgent. "When we find them, we strike with everything we've got," he said, his hand tracing the map. "Dive bombers high, torpedo planes low. We hit their carriers, not their escorts. Remember, sink their carriers, and we win this war." Among his men sat Lieutenant Dick Best, precise, disciplined, and quietly fearless. He'd trained his entire life for this moment, but even he felt the weight of what was coming. As night fell, the Pacific stretched endless and black around them. The sea was calm, the stars indifferent. Somewhere out there, Japan's fleet was coming, and no one would sleep tonight. June 3rd, 1942. Dawn broke over Midway with an eerie stillness. The horizon was a perfect blue line, hiding the storm behind it. At 9 a.m., Ensign Jack Reed, flying a PBY Catalina on patrol, spotted dark shapes cutting through the ocean swell. "Sighted main body," he radioed. "Bearing 262. Distance 700 miles. The message sent a jolt through every command post from Midway to Pearl Harbor. The invasion force was coming, but the carriers, the real threat, were still unseen. Hours later, B-17 bombers from Midway took off to attack the convoy. The pilots flew low and brave, their bombs splashing harmlessly into the sea. That night, PBYs launched a daring torpedo attack, claiming 1 hit. It wasn't much, but it proved something vital. The Japanese knew they'd been spotted. They were no longer the hunters. They were being watched. At 4:30 a.m., the pre-dawn silence shattered. Engines roared across 4 Japanese carriers as 108 planes lifted into the dark sky. Lieutenant Commander Mitsuo Fukuda watched them vanish into the distance toward Midway, the Empire's confidence flying with them. At 5:52, radar operators on Midway picked up the incoming wave. Many planes, bearing 320, distance 93 miles. The alarm howled across the atoll. Pilots sprinted to their aircraft. Marines manned the guns. The defenders knew they were outnumbered, outgunned, but not out of heart. Major Lofton Henderson led his Marine squadron into the sunrise, his Buffalo fighters crawling through the sky like slow-moving targets. "We'll stop them or die trying," he'd said, and he meant it. When the Japanese arrived, the sky turned into a storm of smoke and fire. Zeros tore through the defenders with surgical precision. Planes exploded midair. Others fell blazing into the sea. Henderson's voice cut through the static. "Attack! Attack!" before his transmission went silent forever. The airfield was cratered, the radar destroyed, fuel tanks burning. But most of Midway's planes had gotten airborne. The Japanese had failed to break its spine. Aboard Akagi, Admiral Nagumo faced a deadly dilemma. His first strike hadn't finished Midway, and now his scout planes reported 10 enemy surface ships. He hesitated: rearm the planes for a second attack on Midway, or keep them ready for ships. At 7:15, he made the choice that sealed Japan's fate: rearm for land targets. Below deck, chaos erupted. Bombs were hauled back, torpedoes stacked, fuel lines uncapped. The hangars became ticking bombs, and Nagumo didn't know that 200 miles away, 3 American carriers had already launched everything they had. At 8 a.m., the U.S. strike was in the air. Lieutenant Commander John Waldron of Torpedo Squadron 8 led his men through the clouds toward destiny. "If we run out of gas, we'll ditch together," he told them. "If only one of us gets through, he'll hit a carrier. God be with us." They flew low and slow, straight into the guns of the enemy. One by one, the devastators were torn apart by Zeros. Flames, smoke, chaos. Every plane destroyed. Every man lost, except one. Ensign George Gay, shot down and bleeding, floated in the ocean as the battle raged above him. 15 planes gone, 30 men dead. Not a single hit scored. But their sacrifice pulled the Japanese fighters down to sea level, leaving the skies above wide open. At 10:22 a.m., Commander Wade McCluskey spotted a lone Japanese destroyer racing through the waves. "Follow it," he ordered. The destroyer's wake pointed like a trail straight to destiny. Minutes later, the clouds broke, and there they were. 4 Japanese carriers, decks crowded with planes refueling, bombs scattered, men running. No fighter cover above. McCluskey grabbed his radio. "Attack immediately." 33 dauntless dive bombers peeled from the sky like falcons. Lieutenant Dick Best led his squadron toward Akagi, Nagumo's flagship. The wind screamed through the cockpit as he dove, crosshairs steady, heart pounding. He released his bomb at 2,500 feet, one perfect shot. The explosion tore through Akagi's flight deck, igniting fuel and ammunition. Within seconds, the carrier was a firestorm. Nearby, Kaga and Soryu were hit too, 3 carriers burning in 6 minutes. From the sea, George Gay watched the sky rain fire. The invincible fleet of Pearl Harbor's attackers was dying before his eyes. The sea still burned when the Hiryu turned into the wind. Admiral Yamaguchi stood firm on her bridge, his face expressionless. Smoke from the dying sister ships rose behind him like funeral pyres, but he didn't flinch. "Launch the counterstrike," he ordered quietly. From her deck roared the last of Japan's carrier air power, dive bombers and torpedo planes, sleek and deadly. Their mission: find the Americans and strike back, no matter the cost. Hours later, they did. At 2:30 p.m., they spotted Yorktown. The American carrier's crew had just begun to breathe after hours of tension when the sirens screamed again. Enemy planes incoming. The sky filled with black specks that grew larger by the second. Anti-aircraft guns erupted in fury. Tracer rounds cut across the sky, streaks of red fire. The first bombs hit with terrifying precision. Explosions ripped through the flight deck. Men were thrown into the sea. Then came the torpedoes. One struck midship, another near the engine room. The Yorktown shuddered, slowed, and began to list. Admiral Fletcher, calm amid chaos, made the hardest decision of his life. Abandoned ship. Lifeboats splashed into the oily water as the proud carrier. The ship they had rebuilt in 3 days lay dying in the waves. But even in death, Yorktown refused to sink. She floated stubbornly, like a ghost that refused to leave the fight. By nightfall, Hiryu was alone. Yamaguchi knew what awaited him. The Americans would come. They would find him. Still, he refused to retreat. "We will strike again at dawn," he said. His officers saluted, knowing it was a death sentence. Before dawn, reconnaissance planes from Enterprise found Hiryu cutting through the sea, her flight deck already scarred from endless launches. At 5 p.m., American dive bombers appeared high above the clouds, silent as judgment. Lieutenant Dick Best led the charge again. He dove straight into the sunlight, the glare blinding, the air screaming around him. His bomb hit Hiryu amidships, a single, perfect strike. Within minutes, the carrier was engulfed in flames from bow to stern. Admiral Yamaguchi refused evacuation. He stood on the burning deck, saluting as the flames closed in. "Long live the Emperor," he whispered before vanishing into smoke. By sunset, all 4 of Japan's Pearl Harbor carriers were gone. The once invincible Codebreakers destroyed in a single day. As night fell on June 4th, the Pacific was an open graveyard. Burning oil drifted for miles, the water thick with debris and bodies. American destroyers moved quietly among the wreckage, pulling survivors from the sea, friend and foe alike. In the dim light of the Enterprise's ready room, Admiral Spruance removed his cap and exhaled. "We've done enough," he said softly. No night pursuit. He knew Yamamoto's battleships were somewhere out there in the dark, and his pilots were exhausted, their planes battered and low on fuel. Victory had been won. He would not gamble it away. That night, the sea was strangely calm. The sky, so violent hours earlier, now glittered with quiet stars. The men who survived stared upward, each lost in his own thoughts, of home, of friends lost, of what it meant to live through history. When dawn came on June 5th, the wrecks still smoked on the horizon. American planes scoured the ocean, sinking the damaged cruiser Mikuma and crippling others. The Japanese fleet was in full retreat. The numbers told a brutal story. For Japanese carriers, 1 heavy cruiser, 248 planes, and more than 3,500 men gone. The Americans had lost Yorktown, 1 destroyer, 147 planes, and 362 souls. But numbers couldn't measure what had really changed. Japan's naval supremacy had been shattered. Their best pilots, their most experienced crews, irreplaceable. The tide of the Pacific War had turned. In Japan, news of the disaster was buried. The government called it a strategic withdrawal. Survivors were isolated, forbidden to speak. But in the hearts of the officers who returned, the truth burned like shame. The Empire's dream of dominance had died at Midway. Back in Pearl Harbor, deep beneath the administrative building, Joseph Rockefort sat in his cluttered office, the same coffee-stained desk, the same walls humming with machines. But this time, the silence was triumphant. He unfolded the latest report, confirmation that the Japanese fleet was destroyed. He smiled faintly, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "They'll never know," he muttered, "but that's all right." Rockefort's team, the unseen heroes of Station Hypo, had changed the course of the war without ever firing a shot. Their deception, that simple fake message about a broken water plant, had opened the door to one of the greatest victories in naval history. No medals, no parades, just quiet pride, and the knowledge that sometimes wars are won by those who work in the dark. Midway became more than a battle. It became a lesson written in fire and courage. It proved that intelligence could defeat might. That preparation could turn weakness into power. That courage, even when it leads to death, could change the world. For Japan, it marked the beginning of the end. For America, it was the moment of awakening, the proof that the nation could stand, fight, and win. Admiral Nimitz would later write in his report, Had our dive bombers arrived 5 minutes later, the outcome might have been very different. 5 minutes, the thin line between history and oblivion. Today, Midway Atoll is quiet again. The runways are cracked, the hangars empty, the wind whispering over coral and sand. But beneath the waves lie the ships, the aircraft, and the men who changed the course of the world. The ocean keeps their secrets, but their legacy endures, not in monuments, but in the lessons they left behind. That freedom demands vigilance. That knowledge is as powerful as steel. And that ordinary men, when tested by extraordinary times, can rise to immortality.